My boss didn't raise his voice when he told me I was only good enough for a desk job. He said it the way people talk about the weather. We're sending Julia to get her MBA, he said, folding his hands on the table. Full program, company sponsored. It's a big investment, but she has leadership potential. You... He paused like he was trying to pick the nicest knife. You're solid where you are. Some people are just built for execution. Execution. That was the word he used instead of a worker bee. I stared at the folder sitting between us. I'd seen it 100 times before on other meetings. Budget proposals, contracts, performance reviews. Today it had a number written on a post-it stuck to the front. In blue ink, his handwriting slightly slanted. $500,000. $500,000 for one person's future. We're covering tuition, travel, accommodation, he went on. It's an executive program, so she'll be flying out for modules every few weeks. It's a huge step for her career and for the company. I swallowed. And for my career? He smiled, the polite kind you give someone who just doesn't quite get it. I don't want you to misunderstand this, he said. You're valuable. We rely on you. You're the reason a lot of things don't fall apart around here. But not everyone needs a fast track. Some people are best where they're stable. You're one of those people. Rock, steady. I'd been sitting up straight when I walked in. At that sentence, some part of my spine sank back into the chair. I've been asking about development for a while, I said carefully. Certifications, maybe a part-time program, I thought. And we appreciate that, he cut in, but the education budget isn't infinite. We had to make choices. Julia's at a point where an MBA will multiply her impact. You're already at your natural level. Natural level. I'm 34. I've spent 12 years in the same mid-sized consulting firm. I was there when we were 20 people sharing one coffee machine that never worked. I was there when we moved to a real office with glass walls and fruit bowls. I've worked late so many nights that the cleaning staff know me by name. I thought natural level for me was at least somewhere above the guy who makes the spreadsheets work when no one else knows why they're broken. He kept talking, the way managers do when they're trying to pad a punch with soft words. You'll always have a place here, he said. You're reliable. I don't have to worry when something's on your plate. That's rare. Frankly, this company would fall apart without people like you at the desk, keeping everything moving. I heard at the desk louder than everything else. My hands were on my knees under the table. I dug my nails into my leg, just enough to feel something that wasn't humiliation. Was I considered? I asked. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. For the program, I mean. He hesitated. That half-second was its own answer. You don't really have the profile for it, he said. You're not front-facing. You're not the type that lights up a room. You know that, right? I know I'm not the loudest guy in the meeting. I don't interrupt. I don't have a LinkedIn full of inspirational quotes about crushing it. I thought results mattered more than volume. Julia, he continued, has something you can't teach. Presence, drive. She thinks big. You think structurally. That's not a bad thing. We need both. This just isn't your path. He pushed the folder slightly away from me, as if to underline that it was never meant to be within my reach. I want you to understand this is not a punishment, he said. If anything, you should be proud. You've helped her get to where she is. You've mentored her, trained her. You're part of this success. I almost laughed. Almost. I'd spent the last 2 years showing her how our clients' models worked, proofreading her decks, explaining things twice because she'd be on her phone half the time, and sorry, can you repeat that? Had become a reflex. So what's the plan for me? I asked quietly. Long term. He looked relieved. That was the question he wanted. Stability, he said, like it was a promotion. You keep owning operations. You'll probably see a title change next review cycle. Maybe a bump, but nothing drastic. You're not a flight risk. You're the backbone. Think of Julia as the spear. You don't throw the backbone. I don't know if he heard how ridiculous that sounded. The meeting wrapped up with him standing, walking around the table and clapping me on the shoulder. "I knew you'd take this well," he said. "You're mature. Some people would get jealous. You're not like that. You get the bigger picture." I walked out of his office with a taste of metal in my mouth. Our floor is an open plan. You can see everything from the glass-walled conference room, rows of desks, people hunched over screens, the fake plants that somehow collect dust faster than real ones ever could. As I stepped out, a couple of people looked up, then looked away. You can always tell when people know something you don't. Julia sits 3 pods over from me, 28, maybe 29, dark hair pulled into a perfect low bun, blazer sharp enough to cut you. She had her phone in one hand and her laptop open, the company Slack glowing on the screen. Her face was lit up in the artificial glow. When she saw me, she lifted her hand in a little wave. "Hey," she called. "He talked to you?" "Yeah," I said. Her smile widened. "Crazy, right?" "Yeah," I repeated. My voice came out flat. I don't think she noticed. "I mean, I'm freaking out," she said, spinning slightly in her chair. "It's such a huge opportunity. He said I'll be flying out like every month, and it's fully covered." I honestly didn't think I'd get it. I thought about the time she'd left at 5 sharp because she had plans, and I'd stayed until 11 to fix a model she'd broken by editing the wrong cell. I thought about the weekend I spent rewriting one of her decks because it was so full of buzzwords the client would have thrown it back at us. "Congrats," I said. "Seriously." "Thanks," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and he mentioned you'd be picking up more of the operational stuff while I'm away?" "Just for a while. He said you're like the only one who really understands how everything fits together." Of course he did. "Sure," I said. "We'll figure it out." She grinned, already turning back to her screen. I heard the rapid tap of her keyboard as I walked back to my desk. When I sat down, my monitor woke up, emails blinking in the corner like nothing had happened. My job title on my email signature is Senior Operations Analyst. In reality, I'm the one who makes sure invoices go out correctly, that proposals match what we can actually deliver, that our project plans don't contradict each other. I know which clients will pay late unless you call them. I know which vendor will screw up unless you spell everything out twice. I also know that when a big client complains, my boss forwards me the email with, "Can you look into this?" and then takes the credit when it's fixed. I didn't open my inbox right away. I just sat there staring at my own name on the screen. Mark Reynolds, Senior Operations Analyst. Direct line, email, company logo. I thought about the last 12 years. No major scandals. No massive failures. Promotions, yes, but always just enough to keep me a little grateful and a little tired. Annual reviews with phrases like, "We couldn't do this without you," and "You're the glue here." Now, I knew what those words really meant. You're only good enough for a desk job. The funny thing is, for a few hours that day, I believed him. I told myself maybe this was just how things were. Some people get the spotlight. Some people make sure the lights stay on. I went back to my spreadsheets, my timelines, my tidy little systems, and tried to wear backbone, like a badge instead of a chain. It took me a while to realize that what he'd really said wasn't about my level. It was about how little they thought it would cost to keep me sitting at that desk. But that was just the beginning. The morning after that meeting, my inbox looked like someone had shaken it like a snow globe. New deadlines, new quick asks, new, "Can you handle this while Julia's in sessions?" Messages. She hadn't even left for her first MBA module yet, and already I was being drafted as her full-time support crew. At 9:17 a.m., my boss forwarded me an email chain with a note. "Can you clean this up? She's swamped preparing for her program." Swamped. She'd spent most of the morning rearranging her desk to feel more executive. The project attached was one I'd already handed off to her 2 weeks earlier. A client deliverable, simple enough, a cost model, and a 5-page narrative. When I opened the file, my stomach dropped. She had rewritten entire sections in the kind of MBA preview language that sounds profound until you actually read it. Optimize operational synergies through proactive strategic reframing. No numbers, no actual plan. A wall of buzzwords that would make a consultant cry. I could fix it. Of course I could fix it. I'd fixed worse. But something in me tightened, like a muscle that had finally reached its limit after years of carrying weight no one else saw. Instead of rewriting the entire thing myself, I added comments. Clear ones, specific ones, helpful ones. The kind of comments you give someone you're trying to help grow. 5 minutes later, she walked over, laptop in hand. "Can you just do it?" she asked. "I'm trying to focus on the pre-read for my first residency weekend, and honestly, this model stuff is more your thing." Your thing. The phrase hit harder than she realized. "It's your project," I said gently. "I flagged what needs fixing." She blinked. "Right, but you're so much faster at this. And he said you'd support me during the transition." "Of course he did." "Look," she added, lowering her voice, "I really want to shine at residency. They're evaluating leadership potential from day one. If this deliverable goes out messy, it reflects on the whole team." She meant it reflects on her. And I was supposed to save her from embarrassment. I kept my tone calm. "I'll review it, but you need to revise the narrative yourself. It needs your voice." She frowned, surprised, like no one had ever told her no before. Then she muttered something about being drowned in prep and walked back to her desk. That was the moment the first crack appeared. Not in her career, in my willingness to protect it. The next few weeks were a blur of shift, not in workload, my workload had always been heavy, but in how obviously the imbalance showed now. She was being groomed. I was being used. One afternoon, we had a client call with a manufacturing firm we'd worked with for years. I'd built every financial model they relied on. I knew their numbers better than some of their managers did. But Julia was now owning the relationship, so she led the call. Halfway through, the client asked a simple question about projected margins under scenario B. She froze. I watched her eyes flick toward me on the video feed, a silent plea. I jumped in, explained the math, contextualized the risk, offered mitigation strategies. The client relaxed. "Good to hear from you again, Mark," he said warmly. "You always make this make sense." Julia unmuted. "Right, yes, what Mark said. And we'll provide a full breakdown next week." After the call, my boss messaged me, "Thanks for stepping in. Great teamwork." Teamwork. A few days later, I booked a meeting with him. I walked in with notes, examples, ideas for professional development, actual realistic paths forward that didn't cost $500,000. He listened, or pretended to. "I hear you," he said. "I do. But we can't elevate everyone at once. Your role is critical. If we moved you, whole processes would collapse. Then restructure them," I said quietly. He blinked, as if the concept had never occurred to him. "Mark, you need to understand," he said finally. "Not everyone is destined for a leadership track." There it was again, destiny. Fate, my natural level. "And besides," he added, leaning back, "you don't project leadership presence. You're analytical, reliable, the backbone. That's your value here." Here, a cage disguised as a compliment. I walked out of that meeting with a polite nod, but inside something fundamental shifted. That night, I stopped being the hero. I didn't bail out a project she neglected. I didn't fix a deck she'd overstuffed with meaningless graphics. I didn't stay until midnight rewriting something she'd done at 4:45 p.m. while packing for her residency flight. And the craziest thing, nothing exploded. The world didn't end because I stopped saving it. Her first real stumble happened a week later. She delivered a half-baked presentation to our biggest client, one she hadn't rehearsed, one I had deliberately not rebuilt for her. When the client pushed back, she fumbled, hard. After the call, she messaged me, "Why didn't you tell me the narrative didn't flow?" I replied, "I left comments. You didn't address them." She went silent. For the first time in years, I felt a strange, quiet satisfaction. Not spite, not revenge, just the realization that I had been carrying people who had mistaken my support for obligation. Later that night, while updating a project timeline, I had a thought so sharp and clear it almost scared me. I realized I'd been saving people who never wanted saving, and once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I wasn't the backbone. I was the safety net they assumed would never break. But I wasn't done breaking yet. They thought I'd just swallow it and stay. That was the assumption baked into every email, every forward, every quick question Julia tossed onto my desk on her way out to catch another flight. The company had spent $500,000 turning her into a future leader, and they expected me to quietly glue the gaps together like I always had. But something had shifted in me. Quietly, steadily, like a fault line preparing to move. I wasn't angry. Anger burns out. I was done. I started updating my resume on a Wednesday night, long after the office lights had dimmed to motion sensor glow. I knew my value, just not the version my company kept selling me. I pulled metrics, rebuilt my portfolio, printed out the client testimonials I'd written on behalf of others. For the first time in years, I wrote my own story, not theirs. By Friday, I had 3 calls scheduled with recruiters, not because I was remarkable, because I was useful, consistent, and already well known in the industry for carrying accounts bigger than my job title. The first real sign that the universe was shifting came from an unexpected direction. Our largest manufacturing client, the very one Julia was supposed to be leading after her promotion to Golden Child. The client's VP emailed me directly. "Can we talk privately? I have concerns about the transition." We set up a call. His tone was calm but not casual. "We value your stability," he said. "Since the handover, we've had delays, unclear documentation, and missed details. I don't mean to be harsh, but we can feel the difference." He paused, then added something he shouldn't have needed to say. "I know this isn't on you." For a moment, I didn't trust myself to speak. "I'm doing what I can within my role," I said carefully, "but I don't control the assignments." "Should you?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He sighed. "Look, Mark, I'll be honest. If you ever decided to move on, I'd want to know, preferably before the next quarter." That sentence sat in my chest like a live wire. Not a threat, not a bribe, just truth, the kind people say when they're tired of pretending. A week later, Julia left for her second MBA residency. The moment her plane left the ground, the office fell into controlled chaos. 3 projects overdue, 1 proposal incomplete, 1 client, the VP, now escalating. My boss gathered the team and delivered a speech about temporary turbulence during Julia's leadership development phase. Then he looked straight at me. "We're counting on you to stabilize things," he said. "You always do." Not this time. I did my job, not hers, not 3 jobs, not the invisible labor that had kept this place afloat for years. When Julia's biggest deliverable fell apart on day 3, an operational plan full of contradictions I'd flagged 2 weeks earlier, my boss called me into his office. "What happened?" he demanded. "It was her project," I said. "She didn't address the issues. She told me you were supporting her." "I was," I said, "within the responsibilities you've assigned me." His jaw tightened. "You're being rigid." "No," I replied. "Just following structure, the one you defined." That was the moment he realized the safety net had been cut. By then, I had my offer. It came from a competitor I'd worked alongside years back. They'd heard, because industries always talk, that I might be open to switching teams. The offer was clean, generous, and respectful. A real title, actual decision-making authority, compensation that finally matched my output, and, almost painfully ironic, partial sponsorship for a specialized certification program. Not an MBA, not a $500,000 trophy. Just a real investment in me I didn't hesitate. I accepted. The next morning, I walked into my boss's office with my resignation letter printed on thick stock paper. He read it 3 times, as if the words kept changing. "You're leaving," he finally said. "Now?" "Yes." "This is sudden." "No," I wanted to say. "It's 12 years late." But all I said was, "I'll transition everything properly." Panic flickered across his face. Quick, sharp, human. "We have major deliverables due. Julia's in residency. The client—" "I'll document everything," I said. "Clean handover. No disruptions." It was the first time I saw it. He had no idea how much he depended on me until the moment I stopped being his certainty. The real earthquake hit 2 days later. The VP from our major client emailed my boss directly, CCing the CEO. It was one simple sentence. "We will be transitioning our account to Mark's new firm effective next quarter." I wasn't copied on the internal meltdown, but people talk. And when people panic, they talk louder. The loss of that account didn't just hurt, it cratered the quarter's projections. All the forward-leaning investments, all the budget reallocations made to fund Julia's MBA, all the leadership grooming, they all relied on that revenue holding. And it didn't. My boss barged into my workspace an hour later, red-faced, sweating. "Did you encourage this?" he demanded. "No," I said. "But you knew my relationship with them was strong." "That doesn't mean they follow you out the door." I looked at him, finally feeling the clarity I'd been building toward for months. "That's exactly what it means." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the assistant, not the backbone, not the desk guy, but the person who held his career together without him ever realizing it. "You blindsided us," he said weakly. "No," I replied. "I just stopped covering the blind spots." His face went slack. And in that quiet collapse of expression, shock, fear, recognition, there it was. The micro-catharsis I hadn't known I needed. He finally understood the simple truth. They hadn't just lost an employee. They'd lost the person who made their success look effortless. And by the time they realized what they'd really paid for, it was already gone. It's been a year since my boss told me I was only good enough for a desk job. 12 months ago, I sat in that glass office swallowing a version of myself I no longer believed in. I walked out feeling smaller than my own name. I walk differently now, not with swagger, not with revenge humming under my skin, but with a kind of steady clarity I didn't know I was capable of. I didn't need an MBA to find it. I just needed to leave the place that convinced me I couldn't grow. My first months at the new firm were disorienting. Not because the work was harder, it was familiar, even comfortable, but because people listened to me. They asked for my input before making decisions. They included me in strategy sessions without treating it like a favor. On my second week, the COO walked into my office, closed the door gently, and said, "We want you on our long-term leadership track, not because we think you need polishing, but because your instincts are already where we want the company to go." It wasn't flattery. It wasn't bait. It was recognition. And yes, they offered to partially sponsor a specialized certification if I wanted one. Not as a gatekeeping tool, not as a symbol or a corporate trophy, but as a resource. Something I could choose, not something that determined my worth. The difference between being trained and being trusted is enormous. I hadn't realized how long I'd lived without the latter. The client who followed me made a seamless transition. There were no fireworks, no dramatic emails, no whispered gossip in hallways I no longer walked. They just shifted their business quietly because it made sense. We built out new systems for them at my new firm, cleaner, logical, more transparent. They brought in additional projects over the next 6 months, recommended us to 2 partner firms, and eventually negotiated a multi-year engagement package that became one of our top revenue pillars. At one point, their VP joked, "I should have poached you years ago." I laughed. But there was weight in that laugh, weight I had carried alone for too long. As for my former company, well, chaos doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looked subtle, boring, slow. First, the board questioned why a top client was leaving. Then came the budget freeze as projections dipped. Leadership programs were temporarily paused. Travel funds were reassessed. The $500,000 MBA sponsorship became a sore conversation point in meetings where numbers no longer cooperated. Julia finished her first year of the program, came back wearing confidence like a new blazer, and found herself stepping into an office that no longer had room for the leader she was built to become. Budgets were too tight, projects too thin, opportunities too few. She wasn't demoted. No one wanted that PR mess, but she wasn't launched either. She hovered, waiting for something big enough to justify her new degree. It never came. I don't take pleasure in that. Not really. She wasn't cruel, just favored, overestimated, and pushed too fast into roles she hadn't grown into yet. If anything, she became another casualty of our boss's inability to understand people beyond flash and instinct. And that brings me to him. I saw him again at a conference last month. I was on a panel with other mid-level leaders discussing operational transformations in hybrid business environments. Not flashy stuff, but real work that keeps companies alive. My old boss spotted me afterward. I saw recognition flicker across his face, then confusion, then something I didn't expect. Caution. He waited for me to finish speaking with a small group of attendees, then stepped forward with an awkward smile. "Mark, it's been a while." His voice was carefully neutral, like he was approaching a former shareholder, not a former employee. "It has," I said, matching his tone. Professional, measured, no bitterness to taste. "I've heard things are going well at your new place," he offered. "They are." I didn't oversell it. He nodded too quickly. "Good. Good to hear." For a moment he looked like he wanted to explain himself, maybe even apologize, but leaders like him rarely admit mistakes, especially the ones that cost their company millions. Instead, he said, "If you ever want to explore coming back, I'm sure we could find—" "I'm content where I am," I said gently, cutting him off without cruelty. "But I appreciate the thought." He swallowed once, stiffly. In that second I saw the power dynamic that had flipped so quietly he hadn't noticed until he stood there looking up at me, figuratively, not physically. He shook my hand. His grip was lighter than I remembered. As he walked away, I realized he wasn't afraid of losing me anymore. He was afraid of losing another me, because now he knew how expensive that loss could be. My life now is quieter, not easier, just honest. I work with people who value competence over theatrics. My days end at reasonable hours. My decisions matter. My boundaries hold. Sometimes, in moments when the office hums lightly and the team laughs about something mundane, I feel a kind of peace I never let myself want before. I no longer feel like a piece of furniture holding up other people's ambitions. I no longer sit at a desk wondering if this is all I get. And sometimes when I think back to that day, the folder, the $500,000 smile, the sentence that was supposed to define me, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude, not for what they gave me, for what they taught me to stop accepting. Because the truth is simple. I wasn't only good enough for a desk job, I was just too good to stay somewhere that couldn't see it. And leaving wasn't revenge. It was the first real promotion I ever gave myself.